So thank you very much for everyone that's joining us. Just to let you know that along the way, if you've got any questions, do put them in the chat box and I will be putting them to Agnes a little later. So today joining us is Agnes Uhereczky, and Agnes helps organizations design and implement workspace, gender equality and employee well-being. So who better to talk to us about how to manage the current situation. It's been a joy to work with Agnes over the years and also held a book launch. And we're going to be following up with a link to a book so that you can buy that as well. So thank you very much, everyone that's joining us. And Agnes, over to you. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mark. I hope you can hear me. I think you probably can. Thank you very much,
Perfect.
Mark.
That's all perfect. Thank you.
Great. So thank you very much, Mark, and the Herman Miller Insight Group for your continued support of our work and the years of cooperation we had. And I feel very honored to be having been invited on your fantastic webinar series to talk about the issues that are really dear to me and things that we've been working on over the years, but especially since about April this year. A warm welcome to all of you as well, and thank you very much for deciding to spend this 1 hour with me, with Mark, all of us here together. I'm going to be going through a presentation, and then there will be 3 opportunities for us to exchange a little bit. So when that moment comes, I will ask you and also ask you to use the chat box for that. So when we were brainstorming with Mark about what we could focus on, I was just giving Mark ideas about what we have seen where managing remote workers and teleworking has been challenging for organizations, especially this year when a lot of them were thrown into the deep end of the pool. Some organizations have worked from home, but there were other organizations who've actually never experimented with teleworking before. So this presentation is really coming from that chat we had with Mark pre-webinar on what could be the issues that could be interesting for people. So just here, putting a little bit the whole teleworking into context, teleworking and working from home is, of course, not for everyone. We know that whether the capacity, the possibility of whether you can work from home depends on a number of factors. One of them is, of course, the kind of tasks that you have to accomplish, but also about your occupation, your role. So I would like to really emphasize tasks here, because I really believe that there are tasks for most of the jobs that can be performed from home or from an alternative location. So even hairdressers, nurses have to do some sort of administrative part or design part or development part to their work, and this they could very well do from home. And I think one of the biggest revelations of 2020 has been the sheer number of teachers that had to move to teaching remotely. And I think that it's one of the greatest, feats of 2020, how they managed to do that. Because the coronavirus and the pandemic and the ensuing lockdowns have really shattered through the cultural and technological barriers that existed before about teleworking. And there was this joke at the beginning of the year around, who was driving the technological digital transformation of your workplace. Was it your chief science officer, your chief technology officer, your CHRO? Was the coronavirus? So some things that organizations didn't think was possible became possible. It was made possible. And of course, now we've been in different parts of the world. People have been working from home for different durations. I myself have started fully working from home on the 16th of March. So we'll probably have about a year, perhaps even a year and a half, 2 years of this. And that's going to leave profound changes. So McKinsey estimates that there will be about 3 or 4 times more people that will be working from home at least some of the time in the future beyond the pandemic. And this will, of course, have an impact on the city centers, it will have an impact on office space, it will have an impact on productivity, so loads of different things. So my message here is teleworking is not going to go away. I'm sure a lot of people, a lot of you are perhaps also thinking, oh God, I just wish I could be again on a cramped train going in my commute and, being around, surrounded by people, going back to the office away from my screaming kids maybe. But we know that teleworking is going to become a very viable way of working in the future. So what are perhaps some of the aspects that we have learned in this past year where organizations can improve? And my presentation and our conversation is really built around these three different topics that in our research and in our practice supporting organizations going remote has really stood out as the three challenges. So I'm going to be speaking about the gender aspect of teleworking, because we know from research, we know from studies that teleworking is not the same for men and for women, and managers, organizations really need to be cognizant about that. Then one more aspect that really emerged in 2020 is that, how do you manage remote workers, especially if you have been managing people the entire time you've been working in presence, in the office, management by time, very, very face-to-face, a lot of managers were struggling with. And also team leaders, direct supervisors are definitely at the brunt of it. They're a little bit between the hard place and the rock, because they're being expected from senior management, senior leadership to deliver, and they have their teams now that went remote. So they were especially in a difficult, challenging situation. And the third aspect that I would like to touch upon today is employee well-being. So how did this pandemic affect employees who had to work from home? So we all agree, we're not talking about regular teleworking. What we're talking about is a peculiar type of working from home teleworking, which is mandatory, coupled with a number of other aspects that has affected our lives profoundly. So how are employees doing, and how have some of the organizations reacted to that? And I'm going to be dotting my presentation along with examples from real life companies that we either work with, we've interviewed for our research projects, or who have come on our podcast to talk about that. Now, we're coming to the first interactive bit of this session. So I just put up here a little scenario, something that organizations may have come across. And I invite you to have a read at this. So an employee, Sarah, let's call her, calls her team leader. She's failing to meet her deadline while caring for her 2-year-old twins at home who have no childcare. Because of the lockdown, there's no support for her. She's struggling working from home. So here's my little question to you. What would you do in this situation if you were in the organization where Sarah is working from? I would like to see your replies in the chat. Maybe I'll just give you 1 minute to reflect on this and then to find the chat box and share your answers. I always think this is nice to get a little bit everybody going, to get our thinking hats on a little bit. Okay, thank you. So some of your answers coming in. Somebody's saying, Jill, I would listen to Sarah. Okay, this is going very quickly, so I have to scroll back. I would listen to Sarah. That's definitely good advice. Then her immediately, very good. Part-time for a few days. That's an interesting suggestion. Is there an opportunity to delegating some of her work? Very, very good question. Review resourcing, and if somebody else could work out, then allow her to work around her childcare needs. Fantastic, you guys are great. These are some excellent possibilities and options. Autonomy to design her own workplace, working hours, help find last-minute childcare. How can I meet? Okay, so you are obviously all incredibly knowledgeable people, so thanks a lot for these great suggestions. I'm going to continue with the presentation now. So one of the ideas behind this was to really raise awareness a little bit around the gendered nature of teleworking, because flexible working arrangements are not created equal. We know from research, because teleworking has existed in the US since the 1970s, and for the good part of the last 20 years in other parts of the world. And so researchers were very interested to see whether the social norms around what we think is the role of a woman and a man, whether that has infiltrated the world of teleworking. And we know that it has. So especially in countries and cultures where women are bearing the brunt of childcare, household chores, care for elderly or other sick family members, they are really struggling with teleworking, because they are managing these dual expectations. So if they're working from home, there's an expectation that while they're at home, they're also going to be taking care of either the children or taking care of the household, cooking dinner, cooking lunch, making sure everything works for the family. And what we have seen actually in these past 8 months or 10 months of the pandemic is that it still holds very true. There were a number of researches, some from the Fatherhood Institute in the US, some from an NGO looking at fathers in Germany, that men did step up to the plate. So there has been somewhat of an equalization of caring roles inside the households. But I have to tell you, and I have to cheat here because I have to look at the number, but what happened was that in the US in September, so just September 2020 alone, 865,000 women have dropped out of the labor market, of the workforce, which is a staggering number. And it's about 650,000 more than men. So many women who, decided to leave the paid work have cited that they were overwhelmed. They weren't able to manage their work, homeschooling, caregiving responsibilities. And so we know that this is existing, but already under normal circumstances, when there's no pandemic, juggling or balancing work, paid work, and family responsibilities, caregiving responsibilities, or household or other care responsibilities is already a fine balancing act. For families, there's never 100% foolproof solution. There's always a mix and match of either the paid childcare coupled with some nannies or the grandparents, after school care. So it's a puzzle of different solutions that have to come together. And we know from research that whenever, for example, a child is ill in dual couple working families, it's usually most often the mother who is going to take the day off to care for that sick child. But what happened was, tragically, under the current circumstances, a lot of the solutions that working parents are relying on, working mothers especially, have gone out the window. There's no more way to see grandparents, babysitters you just don't know, and a lot of the formal care structures have closed, especially in some of the hardest hit regions. So this is definitely something that employers and organizations need to be aware of. Now, I wanted to here this notion of work-life boundary management, because this is a relatively new area of research into work-life balance. It's about 6 years old, and the researcher behind this is Ellen Ernst-Kosek from the Purdue University. She has done some amazing work around boundary management styles and boundary types. And I just wanted to briefly touch upon that in this session today. So what happened was that prior to the pandemic, we used to at least have some boundary between work and our non-work life. And, going back 50 or 40 years, this boundary was incredibly hard, because you would go to the office, you would work in the office or your workplace, you would go home and leave everything work-related in the workplace. So there was a very important physical or spatial barrier between work and life, but there was also temporal or time barrier, because you would have your evenings, weekends off. Now, what happened was that in the past year, during the pandemic, we really went from work-life balance to work-life integration. We were eating and sleeping and playing and working in the same space with our digital connected devices. That meant that the boundary that was already actually quite fragile, because knowledge work is, by definition, a little bit boundaryless. Enforcing these boundaries was even more challenging. So what is going on here? If employees feel that they have a weak control of their boundaries, that is what leads to disengagement, to stress, to worry, and even can lead to burnout. There's a very interesting research that actually showed that if you expect an email from your direct supervisor or manager over the weekend, you are going to become stressed. And that stress is then actually transferred or transmitted to your spouse or your other family members. So you don't even have to receive an email to have this kind of stress level that is more akin to your working stress level, your working mental frame, but just the thought of you may be receiving an email. So this boundary is already very fragile. And so managers, especially those managing remote workers, especially those managing remote workers with family responsibilities, have to be very, very aware of this and support employees with the boundary control, boundary management. As you know, you gave already some of the great ideas in the chat for Sarah's conundrum, but making sure that, for example, employees are able to first put all their private or family engagements into the calendar, block the times that they're going to have to be present for their family or other care, responsibilities, and then work the working hours around that. That can already be a huge relief. So if you know when your babies are napping or when is it that you have some sort of help, you can then work your working hours around it. So what have the companies done actually in the past year? Some of the organizations have been really excellent in stepping up and supporting their employees. So one of the most effective and most important intervention is around work organization. How do we organize the work? What is the expectation of the employee? What do you have to do? When can you do it? At the beginning of the pandemic, Europe, so around April, May, we ran a little survey and we asked working parents, what would be helpful for you? And an overwhelming majority of the respondents said that they were really hoping their employer would deprioritize. Because what happened is in the beginning of the pandemic, a number of organizations got very scared about revenue, about survival. So they kept putting more and more pressure on their employees to deliver more, to do more, to work more. Whereas for them, especially in the beginning, the transition phase, what they really were hoping for is to be able to do a little bit less. So working organization, organizing the work, the deadlines, all of that is very crucial. And I'm going to touch upon that a little bit in just a minute as well. Some employers were able to provide childcare solutions. We've heard from one organization that organized actually some sessions. So between the employees, they would take turns and somebody would prepare something for an hour or 2 hours and sit in front of, Zoom, and all the other colleagues could take their kids and put them in front of the Zoom call, and there would be some quiz or there would be some game, there would be some, lecture on something. So really trying to use the internal resources and mobilize the employees to support each other. Some organizations were hiring additional backup care. They were hiring some additional childcare. But, it doesn't take a lot of money and resources to do that. Actually, a lot of the solutions can be quite simple. Contacting your local Scouts movement and asking them to, take some of the kids to the next playground. It's an outdoor open door activity. It can be quite COVID safe. And even, I can tell you, even just relieving working parents 1 or 2 hours at a crucial moment in a work process can be really a godsend. Then, of course, there were employers who offered also paid leave or offered reduction of the working hours. But don't forget that if somebody goes part-time, their salary and benefits go part-time as well. And also this will have an implication on their pension. So families who have to cope with childcare payments, have to cope with mortgage payments, student loan payments, going part-time is unfortunately not an option for many. That's why it's such a tragic number to see all these women who had to leave the workforce. And then one of my favorite examples comes actually from a Polish finance organization, financial services organization. What they did, they highly individualized the working time arrangements between their employees. So they would say, when can you work? When can you get work done? And there was a family, a dual earner couple. And what they agreed was it was 1 week, it was the mother who would work from 7 to 2 p.m. every day. And then her husband would be watching the child or the children. And then the father, so her husband, would work from 2 p.m. to 8 or 9 p.m. And then next week they would change the shifts. And the company, their employer, was okay with that. So asynchronous working has also really gained a lot of the buzz around here, especially inspired by Matt Mullenweg, who is one of the founders of WordPress. He's talking a lot about this, especially with regards to distributed teams, that a number of organizations, what they've done was they've taken their kind of office way of working online, as if it was a physical but virtual. So we all log on at 8:39 a.m. at the same time. We're all supposed to sit there at the same time, and then we all leave at 5, 6, whenever at the same time, and we're able to exchange messages and really talking real time to each other. But of course, that doesn't work if you have something else, if you have to launch your kids' homeschooling, or if you have to do other things at the same time. For me, for example, one of the sheerest challenges is cooking, just cooking every day, at lunch, at dinner, or getting some food on the table. So asynchronous working, and I encourage you to look it up, is when you do not expect your colleague or your team member to give you an immediate response, where you try to organize the work in a way that you can be a lot more autonomous, a lot more independent, and that can help you actually shift your schedule really around the times when you're available. So now we're going to go to the next little scenario, and I'm going to pull up again the chat window. So here's another scenario. Farid, a new member of the team working from home, is struggling to meet deadlines. The deliverables are not up to the expected standards. So if you were in this situation, how would you react? What would you do? And I'm also reading your other comments. I'm not really able to follow your comments while I'm speaking, but they're all very, very interesting. Somebody's asking, does the pattern change for same-sex couples? We could actually talk about this afterwards. So somebody's saying, Kyle, partner him up with an experienced team member. That's a good idea. Talk first and work out a strategy together. Organize a team call. Thank you, Noemi. Thank you, Christine. Arrange some time to chat. Yes, so communication definitely is a key issue here. On-the-job training. Okay, what's preventing him from performing? Lisa, share expectations. Fantastic. I'm going to be speaking about that. Also, Sarah is referring to, no, Adil is referring to expectations. Mentor buddy. Great. Thank you so much. Thanks a lot for all your fantastic ideas. They were all really good, and I'm going to be touching on a few of them. Because one of the key aspects that when we have done our researches into teleworking and also worked with organizations who were going online or going remote, one of the crucial aspects of employee performance, but also employee well-being, employee engagement, was the skills of line managers to manage effectively remote workers. And this is really a skill. I have to insist on this because it's not something that we're born with. It's not something that just happens by itself. It's really something has to be learned. And of course, one of the key cornerstones of that is management by objectives or management by results. So for a lot of conservative or old school organizations, it was actually very difficult to move from the time management to management by objectives, and some of them never managed. I know that you are a highly enlightened bunch here on this Herman Miller webinars, but there are organizations out there who are actually really trailing behind. We ran a survey recently, and we just received one of the comments was, telework is not work. So we received also questions about, okay, so, but who will get the work done when my employees are working from home? So you can see that there's still a lot of work needs to be done on management skills development, on changing mentalities, changing attitudes, especially if you've been an organization that has never tried teleworking before, or has seen teleworking as a kind of reward for the most deserving employees, or as a privilege, then shifting to management by objectives or teleworking or full remote was definitely a challenge. Communication, quite a few mentioned communication, talking to Farid, talking to your employees. This is so important. And at the beginning, what we have seen is that there were endless Zoom calls. People were spending so much time on Zoom calls, in online meetings. And one of the reasons for that is that there's the fear of the team leaders, of the line managers, of letting go, of saying, okay, I know you're at home, so just get on with work, and I'm here for you to speak to if you need resources, if you need help, if you need validation. So instead, it was a lot of front loading of the communication with these 2, 3, 4 hour Zoom meetings. Thankfully, a lot of the organizations have learned from that and have put in place new rules or new ways of doing that. For example, one of them is do not have Zoom calls or any video calls that go on for an hour. Limit your video conferencing to 45 minutes, and then always allow for a 15-minute break for your employees when they have to start on the next. So stopping these back-to-back calls, then understanding, putting it into a sort of a communication metrics of when do we actually need to have a video conferencing, when do we need a one-on-one, when is a phone call the best, when can we use this with Slack, or we can maybe use some other messaging apps. But what has been very clear is that organizations weren't really discussing about the norms, the communication norms that they had to do, that they had to apply. So it was a little bit improvisational. And here, organizations really have to find the good balance between having some sort of policies or framework or rules in place, but not overbearing or overloading employees with rules and policies. So it's for every organization to decide what is the right amount, what are the right channels, what is the best way. But keeping these channels open, especially for employees to come to you, is important. And then I mentioned already the key ingredient, really the glue that holds teleworking, remote working together, is trust. And so when we are called to diagnose organizations who are maybe struggling with remote work, often it is neither technology nor the skills, it's a trust building. If you have everybody copied into everybody's email, and then all of a sudden you're left out of some emails, these kind of things really show that there's a challenge with trust inside the organization. So here is for you a little bit of a quiz. I have 4 self-assessment questions that I propose to you to just keep in mind whenever you work with your employees or your teams, in understanding whether you're apt at managing them by their objectives and their expected results. So the first question is, do you know as a manager what a finished product looks like? Do you have a good sense of what is it that you're expecting your employee to come up with to deliver to you? Second question is, can you explain that? Can you explain it in a clear way? Can you explain it in a way that your employees are going to understand and be able to relate to it? Then, a very important aspect, and that links back to my point about overload and work organization. Do you know as a manager how long it takes to achieve that kind of results? When we run employee surveys, a lot of times actually we hear back, but my boss doesn't know how long this takes me and they expect me to do this quicker. And I understand that there's pressure, we want to keep a rhythm, we want to make sure that the organization is going. However, unrealistic deadlines are doing more harm than good. Maybe in the short term, they're able to spur on teams, but over the long term, they're just doing a lot of damage. So realistic deadlines, realistic expectations, and then what are the resources that your employees need from you to be able to deliver this kind of result on time to your expectations? So if you can answer all four of these questions, then I think you're good to go. Now we're coming to the third area that I wanted to discuss with you. Here's again a little scenario for you. You notice that some team members remain silent in Zoom calls with their cameras switched off. You also hear about some increased tension in the team. So I kindly invite you to reflect on this scenario and maybe give us your comments or your questions in the chat, and I'm going to try to follow them. Thank you very much, Manny, from joining from the Philippines. Nice to have you on here. Okay, so your answers are starting to come in. Okay, arrange some smaller water cooler moments to socialize. Some of you are suggesting, okay, they haven't the proper tools, equipment. Okay, that's a very good point. Introverts, okay, very good. Gabor, hi, very good point there. I'd like to encourage share audio. Yes. We've had managers who have actually said that, you know, what do I do if I have these silent participants? Speak to them afterwards by phone. Great point, Christine. Facilitate the conversation with the team. What's going on? That's a great point. Who said that? Your comments in fast, so I have to scroll back here. Definitely, some of you are saying contribute, speak to them in private, and then also taking it to a team level conversation. That's also a really good idea. That's great. So thanks a lot for everyone for contributing. And I wanted to use this little scenario to introduce employee well-being actually into the mix of all the success factors and all these key issues that organizations need to be mindful of and aware of when employees are working from home. So the first one, and of course that's quite the interesting aspect, and that's something that I know Mark and his team were working on very much, is the ergonomic situation. And I have to admit that at the beginning of the lockdowns, I was also part of the dining table gang, and I really did my back in. But there were employers who did brilliantly, who immediately offered employees to come to the organization, to come to the office buildings, to get their chairs, get their equipment, to ensure that when they are at home, they're comfortable and they're not having, you know, an increased risk of musculoskeletal injuries and problems. Then there's definitely the physical well-being aspect. So how do you know, where, as I said, there's no more commute, there's no more walk, there's no more, some of the people actually have had their gym membership close to their offices, or they would be cycling to work. So how do you make sure that you get that kind of exercise that have been built into your day, have been your habits when you were still commuting or going to the office. And actually, quite a lot of employers have also been very innovative on that, and they have either organized some joint, workouts, or had, exercise sessions or dance-off sessions for the children as well, so to involve the whole family who's been stuck at home. Some of them have rolled out apps, especially gym or workout or yoga apps. You have an unlimited, number of videos that you can follow at your own pace. Already before, there's been a lot of physical well-being revolutions in some organizations with Fitbits and all of that. But this has really challenged HR managers and occupational health professionals to see how can we take those same benefits and actually, give it to our employees who are working from home. And then there's been, of course, a lot of issues on the mental aspect, the mental health aspect, and there's been really a spectrum. So you've had the overwhelmed parents working from home, but you also had the really lonely single person working from home. And you also had young people who were maybe living together in a roommate style, and they have been really struggling. So this is difficult for everyone. It's not it's not like this is great. I think Justin Trudeau said that this actually sucks, and it does. So the idea here is to understand and be very open and acknowledge that this is really, really challenging for everyone. And so a lot of organizations have also rolled out support via mindfulness coaches, mindfulness training. SAP, Switzerland, Austria has done that, I know. So really trying to boost that. But still, I wanted to touch upon this issue, which the research has been done by the Canadian Institute of Health Research, and they have identified this COVID stress syndrome. So something that is it's more than just us feeling lonely, more than just us, not being really ourselves. This is a real mental health challenge. And I just want to give you a little bit the numbers, because what the Canadian Institute of Health Research is saying is that the mental health pandemic, or the mental health problem, is going to eclipse actually the COVID-19, so the actual physical illness of the pandemic. So in this research of the Canadian Institute of Health Research, in their respondents, they had 2% who had COVID, 6% of the respondents knew someone who had COVID, 38% had moderate, and 16% had severe COVID-19 related distress, or this COVID stress syndrome. And this is a mixed bag, actually. It comes from different things. But there's definitely our own fear of contamination, our fear of the illness itself. Offices have been actually really good in adapting. But again, you have a number of vulnerable people who have pre-existing conditions, or they have pre-existing conditions in their family. So this is, not something we're taking light. So there's the fear of the illness itself. Then there's the traumatic stress symptoms, and that's linked to us hearing about people being sick, people being really sick, and people dying on a daily basis for the past 10 months. And this is not something that just, passes us by. The numbers are simply staggering. So there is definitely that as well. Then a number of people are actually faced with financial insecurity. They're afraid of losing their jobs, of losing their fear. I think the people who probably are in this call and the people who were able to continue working from home are the lucky ones, because, hairdressers and small shop owners and small restaurant owners, they've really had the brunt of it. And of course, the UK, you have also coupled with the whole Brexit situation, which is not helping. And then compulsively checking the news, trying to find information, that just relaunches the whole cycle. So the reason I wanted to put up this slide, and I'm conscious of time, is I wanted to show that this is more than just, I'm not standing up at home enough to move around, or I'm, bored, or I'm frustrated. This is a real a real mental health challenge. And some of the UK mental health charities estimate that about 10 million people in the UK, so every fifth person, is going to need some sort of mental health support in the near future because of that. And also, I of course had to mention that it's not just simply about well-being, but then there's also a clear crisis of safety in the form of a dramatic increase of domestic violence cases. So the UN has called it the shadow pandemic. Violence against women has increased by 20%, and also the incidence of violence against children. So if you're in a call with somebody who seems distressed or disconnected, I think it's good for every manager, everybody working in organizations, to inform yourself about what are maybe the early signs of harassment or abuse or sexual harassment or domestic abuse, and maybe be also mindful that it can happen. We know statistically this could happen, this could affect one of your colleagues, and then see whether you could reach out or how you would like to help support your employees going through that. So again, some of the solutions here, I would definitely encourage everybody to ask employees, what is it that you need? And to my last point, not just assume because there's organizations sometimes have what is called the culture of silence, especially Asian cultures, or cultures of organizations with a lot of hierarchy or gender imbalance. People do not have the voice or the agency to speak up because they may be afraid to be embarrassed, to make a fool of themselves, or even for their career, or even for their safety. So do not assume that you know what they need or what's going on, but ask them, offer multiple opportunities of anonymous platforms, anonymous surveys to gauge what's happening with your teams. Normalizing the conversation by role modeling, by delivering talks, by creating joint charity events or fundraising. There's a number of, good practices on how to normalize the conversation, bring this conversation to the table. And, I think that there have been some organizations that were really great with this. They mobilized employee resource groups, MBO Financial Group in Montreal or in Canada and across the US. What they've done, they actually called for volunteer musicians in their employees who came together and formed a virtual band and wrote a song, and that song became a kind of a rallying anthem for the BMO, sorry, not MBO, the BMO workforce. And so there have been a number of great initiatives, because as much as this pandemic is taking a toll on our mental health and our well-being, there's also a real mobilizing aspect and, also really boosts our altruism. Another organization, what they've done, and I really like that example, is they have fruit delivered to the office, fruit baskets delivered to the office from a small local producer. And instead of just canceling that because nobody was in the office, what they've done is, with the agreement, so they asked employees, what would you like us to do? And together they decided that they have redirected that fruit basket service to the closest hospital for the healthcare workers. So that meant that they were not, this small producer was not losing their contract, and they were able to give something back to their community healthcare workers. So there are a number of great examples and also ideas that are not highly expensive, but can really boost morale. But definitely ask people, what is it that you need, and find a way around that. So what's the future of remote work? I'm sure remote working is going to be staying around, and hopefully towards the end of next year, we're going to be coming to a situation that is fairly normalized. And, teleworking can be great when it's done correctly. So it means that when employees have the opportunity to go to the office for maybe 2-3 days and work from home for 2-3 days. So this kind of hybrid way of working, where it's built on trust and mutual support, where managers are able to clearly articulate their realistic expectations, and that there's a good framework for everybody to continue teleworking. So here are my contact information, and this is the book that Mark was alluding to. We co-authored it back in 2018, not knowing how relevant it's going to get. It's really about how do you implement remote working, but work-life balance, work-life integration management in very practical, pragmatic terms. So thank you for listening, and I'm happy to take the rest of the time to answer your questions.
Thank you very much, Agnes. Outstanding. And thank you, everyone, for your incredible interaction. I've actually copied and pasted all the suggestions because I think you'll want to look at them later, Agnes, and maybe even build them into your future presentations. But there were a couple of questions which were right at the top, and I thought we'd go back to especially that one on the same-sex couples. Mm-hmm. Does the pattern change for same-sex couples? It sounds like you're assuming a male and female parent setup.
Yeah, so I think it really is, and that's going to be my question to all your my answer to all your questions, because all of this is highly contextual and highly individualized. So you could have the same kind of employees working in the same level, the same floor, living in the same city, but there may be just one aspect that's going to change for one of them. That's going to make a whole world of difference for them, how they're able to manage work and life. So I think in terms of, one thing that I would, definitely say is that, and we've heard this from a number of organizations, that organizational gender equality policies are usually very narrowly focusing on mothers. One type of woman, or mothers, or maybe older women with care responsibilities for grandchildren and elder family relatives, but it's also very rare. So usually organizational policies are focusing, gender equality policies or diversity inclusion policies are focusing on new mothers. So there's definitely room to enlarge this understanding to all types of families, all types of couples, all types of family setups, be it same-sex or heterosexual, single-parent households, migrants, people with disabilities. So thanks for that comment. I'm not sure I answered it, but I think it's a very good point you raised.
Thank you. I thought it was an interesting point that someone raised, that at the start, a large amount of companies actually reduced staff, so actually workloads increased for many, and that's also added to stress, which I thought was a huge challenge for lots of organizations and people.
Absolutely. So yeah, no, I totally agree, and that's why I cannot insist more on deprioritizing, because the idea is to have a long-term vision to get through all of this and not burn everybody out now.
Great, thank you. And someone else makes the observation that in fact we aren't in the post-trauma era yet, because this is still going on, and so we really don't know what the effects of post-traumatic stress is going to be like, actually. And I think and Ryan makes the point that actually we don't really know what this impact, it needs to continually be reviewed. I think it's a huge challenge, and thank you for highlighting that, Agnes.
Yeah, absolutely.
I think that's all the questions. There were lots of other observations, and I will just finish with, I thought, well, Lisa made some really a good suggestion. Employees are just over-surveyed, but actually having workshops using an anonymous platform like Menti actually might help with some of the challenges that you've raised.
That's a very good point.
Thank you very much. Agnes, thank you very much for what was an outstanding session. We continue to run our events program and hope that you can join us for some more events. We have lots lined up, and I will put in the chat box the events listing. Tomorrow you will receive a follow-up email. I don't know if you're going to share the slides at all.
Yes, happy
Agnes,
to.
But we'll certainly
happy
we'll
to
share the slides, and we're going to put this up on YouTube as well, the talk, so that'll go up there as well. But lots of links and the opportunity to buy the book.